Hello, bookish enthusiasts, and get ready to be transported to different worlds, one page at a time. Today, we unlock the doors to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. If my videos bring a smile to your face or provide valuable insights, show some love by liking and following my channel. And if you want to take it a step further, leave a comment sharing your favorite part or any suggestions you may have. Elendil, the music of the Ainur and Valaquenta. The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien is a story of creation. Ea, the world that is created, and the Valar prepare the way for the children of Iluvatar. Along the way, the Valar and the children of Iluvatar battle evil in the form of Melkor in order to survive and maintain good in E. The Silmarillion parallels the Christian story of creation in many ways, but still manages to introduce its own mythology of the creation of the world and humanity. Iluvatar creates the Ainur, the Holy Ones, in order to sing for him. At first, each member of the Ainur sings alone, but then they begin to harmonize. Iluvatar reveals a theme to which the Ainur compose a great song. Melkor, one of the Ainur, interweaves matters that are not within the theme, creating chaos. Iluvatar dispels the chaos, which Melkor reinstigates a second and third time, until Iluvatar causes the Ainur to cease singing. He will show the Ainur, especially Melkor, that nothing will happen against his will. The Ainur are afraid and amazed as Iluvatar shows them the world that he plans to create. Iluvatar plans to conceive two races of children, elves and men. Melkor's ambition haunts him in his desires to rule, and Iluvatar reveals darkness which has never existed before, causing anxiety amongst the Ainur. Iluvatar creates Ea, the world that is. While some Ainur stay with Iluvatar, others descend to Ea and become Valar, the powers of the world. They create a land for themselves and name it Arda. Since Ea is yet unformed, the Valar set to work to create Ea as Iluvatar planned Ea as Iluvatar planned E to be. Melkor tries to rule the Valar, but Manwë, the king of the Valar, will not allow him. In jealousy, Melkor wages war against the Valar and undoes their work to create Ea in Iluvatar's image, but the Valar relentlessly recreate their work in order to prepare Ea for the reception of elves and men. The great amongst the spirits on Ea are the Valar, the powers of Arda. Melkor is not mentioned by the Valar. There are 7 lords and 7 queens, or Valier, of which Manwë is the first of all kings. Manwë marries Varda. Ulmo is the lord of the waters and second only to Manwë. Ulmo loves elves and men. Ali is the lord of the substances of which Arda is made. He marries Yavanna, the giver of fruits. Nemo is the doomsman of the Valar and is married to Ver, the weaver. Irmo, the master of visions and dreams, marries Esti the gentle, the healer of hurts and weariness. Nienna mourns and grieves. Tokaz, or Astaldo the valiant, is the greatest of the Valar in strength and deeds, and he marries Nessa, the dancer. Orome is a great hunter, but has uncontrollable anger. He is married to Vanna, the ever young. These are the 8 high ones of Arda. Other spirits of lesser degree also reside on Ea and are called Maya and are called Mayor. Of these, the most renowned are Ossi, Uinen, Melian, and Olerin. Ossi is a vassal of Ulmo and is married to Uinen, the Lady of the Sea. Melian tends the trees, while Olerin is the wisest of the Mayor. Melkor is the enemy, and the Noldor name him Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world. He falls because of his ambition to rule, but many are drawn to his splendor and evil ways, such as the Valarankar and Balrogs. Sauron, or Gortor the Cruel, is Melkor's second in command. Quinta Silmarillion, The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 1, of the Beginning of Days, and Chapter 2, of Owl and Yavanna. The first war begins before Arda is fully shaped. Melkor has the upper hand until Tolkien comes to the aid of the Valar. The Valar brings order to Ea. Yavanna plants seeds, and Manwë places lamps at Aluin and Ormol. The Valar rest and have a great feast. Altel and Tolkien are weary. Melkor covets Arda and builds a fortress, Utumno. While Tolkien sleeps, Melkor attacks the Valar and mars the perfection of Arda, then flees. Since Melkor destroys the Valar's dwelling, they go to the land of Aman and establish Valinor and build a city, Valmar. Yavanna sings to two saplings which grow into flowering trees, the two trees of Valinor. As the days of the firstborn, the Elves, approach, Melkor still lurks about Ea. Manwë watches over all of Ea, except what Melkor manages to hide in the shadows. Olmo dwells alone in the outer ocean, except when there is need of great counsel. Yavanna often goes to the outer lands to heal the ruin caused by Melkor. She urges the others to wage war against Melkor before the firstborn arrive. Through the Valar's dedication, Ea becomes as the children of Ilúvatar, elves and men. Know it. The Valar are destined to be the chieftains of elves and men, but they are closer to elves than men. Ilúvatar knows that men, the second-born, will stray because they resemble Melkor more than they do any of the Valar. Because of this, men live on Ea a short time while elves are immortal. When Aui makes the seven fathers of the dwarves, Ilúvatar chides him for creating life. Au apologizes and offers to destroy his creation, but Ilúvatar shows mercy, allowing them to remain but condemning them to sleep until the coming of the firstborn. While waiting for the firstborn to arrive, Au makes the dwarves stronger and causes them to live longer than most men, though not forever like the elves. All tells Yavanna, and she grieves that his children will not care for her animals and plants. Yavanna mentions her anxiety to Manwë, who dwells on it in his sleep and learns from Ilúvatar that Yavanna's favorites, the trees, will not be destroyed during the firstborn's power or in the secondborn's youth. Manwë tells Yavanna, who warns Aule, that his children must beware the avenging power in the woods. Quinta Silmarillion, The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 3, of the Coming of the Elves and the Captivity of Melkor, and Chapter 4, of Thingol and Melian. The Valar dwell in bliss, and Yavanna causes many things in the spring of Arda to sleep while awaiting the coming of the firstborn. Meanwhile, Melkor consolidates his strength and builds a fortress, Angband, which is commanded by Sauron. The Valar call a council because they are concerned about Melkor's power in the outer lands since the firstborn will arrive soon. Varda sets stars in the skies to provide light to the outer lands, and as she finishes, the firstborn awake. The elder children of Ilúvatar are greater and stronger than the younger children. Orome finds the elves by chance. But first Melkor learns of them and kidnaps some of them to breed as a new race which serves him out of fear, the orcs. He blames these disappearances on Orome. Therefore, many of the elves run when Orome appears. Manwë calls council to determine how to protect the elves from Melkor's shadows, and the Valar wage war against Melkor, during which Tolkien defeats and binds Melkor. There is peace for a long age, but the Valar did not find Sauron or all of Melkor's evil creatures. Melkor sues for a pardon which is denied, and Manwë sentences him to imprisonment in Mandos for 3 ages. The Valar debate whether to let the elves roam free on Middle-earth because some fear for the firstborn's safety amidst the shadows. The Valar summon the elves, who are afraid of all of the Valar except Orome. Orome brings as many of the elves as possible to Cuivine, but they are sundered. Those which follow Orome are called the Eldered, while the others are the Othery. The Eldar follow Orome and are afraid when he leaves them to tend to other things. Orome leaves the elves at the shores of the Great Sea and asks Manwë's counsel. The host of the Teleri dwells beyond the river Gelion for a great while. Melian, the Maya, is very wise and has a beautiful voice. Elwë, an elf, hears her song, and an enchantment ensnares him, causing him to forget his people for a while. His people cannot find him and crown Olwe as king of the Teleri. Melian and Elwë rule a realm together and have the fairest of all of Ilúvatar's children that ever were or ever shall be. Elwë is known as King Greymantle or Eleuthingol, and his elves are known as the Grey Elves or Sindar. Quinta Silmarillion. The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 5, of Eldamar and the Princes of the Eldalee, and Chapter 6, of Feanor and the Unchaining of Melkor. Olmo takes the Eldarto Valinor on an island, half of which breaks off, becoming the Isle of Balar. The Teleri remain in Middle-earth ruled by Olwe. The Teleri become enamored of the seas. Elwë and Melian return to his people. The Teleri beg Olmo to stay their voyage, so he fastens the island to the foundations of the sea, creating Tol Eressëa, the lonely Eressëa, the lonely island. A gap is made in the great walls of Pelori for the Vanyar and Noldor to see the stars. The elves erect a high hill, Tuna, and build a city, Tirion, on top of it. Yavanna makes the elves a tree called Galathilion. The elves find earth gems, which enriches all of Valinor. The Noldor return to Middle-earth with their king, Finwë. After a long age, the Teleri comes at last to the land of Aman with Ossi's help in creating ships. The Vanyar love the land of the Valar and abandon Tirion to dwell on Manwë's mountain. Finwë rules Tirion, Olwe rules Alqualande, but Ingwe, the High King of the Elves, abides at the feet of Manwë on Taniquetil. Except Melkor's evil creatures, all living things abide in the land of Aman. Feanor, the spirit of fire, is born. Míriel, his mother, has a difficult labor and says she will be unable to have any more children. Finwë grieves, and Manwë delivers Míriel to Irmo's care. Míriel sleeps, and her spirit leaves her body in her sleep. Finwë gives all his love to Feanor, who grows swiftly in mind and body, but has a secret fire within him. Feanor marries Nerdanel, who tries to restrain him, but eventually the couple becomes estranged. Nerdanel bears 7 sons to Feanor. Finwë marries a second wife, Indis, but this displeases Feanor. 3 ages pass, and Melkor is released. Melkor begs pardon while secretly postponing his vengeance. At first, Melkor is not permitted to wander beyond the Valar's watch, but his words persuade Manwë of his reformation. Later, Melkor claims that he taught Feanor evil, but Feanor is driven only by the fire of his own heart. Quinta Silmarillion. The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 7, of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor, and Chapter 8, of the Darkening of Valinor. Feanor adds light from the trees of Valinor to 3 earth gems, creating the highly prized Silmarils. Melkor covets the Silmarils and plots to ruin the relationship between the Elves and the Valar. Elves, especially Feanor, desire freedom. When Feanor openly rebels against the Valar, Finwë calls a council where Fingolfin appeals to his father to restrain Fëanor. Fëanor arrives and draws his sword, threatening Fingolfin. The Valar summon Fëanor to court, where they learn of Melkor's malice. The Valar sentence Fëanor to 7 years of banishment from Valinor, and Finwë returns to Middle-earth with his son, where they build Forminos. Simultaneously, Tolkien searches for Melkor to punish him for instigating discord between the Valar and the Elves, but Melkor hides from Tolkien. Melkor goes to Fëanor, offering help in hiding the Silmarils from the Valar. Fëanor considers, but his hate for Melkor overcomes his fear of losing the Silmarils. Melkor hides where no one can find him. Manwë and Tolkien search to the north for Melkor in vain, but Melkor travels south to Ungoliant's abode, where he gains her assistance in his revenge against the Valar. Melkor and Ungoliant sneak into the land of Aman during a feast. Finwë is not present at the feast, but Fëanor, in response to Manwë's summons, is present at the feast and is reconciled to Fingolfin. Melkor and Ungoliant kill the 2 trees of Valinor, creating darkness in Valinor. The Valar are unable to find him, Melkor. Quinta Silmarillion. The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 9, of the Flight of the Noldor, and Chapter 10, of the Sindar. The Valar mourn because of the death of the 2 trees of Valinor. The only light left from the trees lives in Fëanor's Silmarils, which Fëanor refuses to relinquish. The Valar receive news from Forminos that Melkor has ransacked the fortress, killed Finwë, and stolen all the jewels, including the Silmarils. Fëanor curses Melkor and the summons from Manwë that prevented him being at Forminos when Melkor attacked it. The doom of the Noldor draws near. Elsewhere, Ungoliant tries to take the Silmarils from Melkor, but she flees when his great cry summons all his evil creatures that have been waiting his return. Henceforth, Melkor wears the Silmarils in his crown, inspiring fear in all. Fëanor speaks to the Noldor in order to entice them to leave the Valar and return to Cuavinian. Fëanor and his sons take an oath to pursue any who take the Silmarils from them. Fingolfin and Finarfin speak out against the idea, causing dissent among their sons and the Eldar, most of whom follow Fingolfin, while only some follow Fingolfin, while only some follow Fëanor, and very few stay in Valinor. The Valar are sad that the Eldar are leaving. Manwë sends a message that though the Valar will not prevent the Eldar from leaving, they disapprove of their intentions. Manwë also banishes Fëanor from Valinor yet again. As the Eldar leave, Finarfin and Finrod look back at Valinor, mourning their decision. Fëanor asks the Teleri to join them in their return to Middle-earth, but the Teleri refuse to even help them build ships, attempting to dissuade them from their departure. Fëanor tries to steal the Teleri ships and a battle ensues. The Teleri lose, and many are slain, grieving Uin, who causes the sea to plague the Noldor as a punishment. Mandos appears and speaks the prophecy of the North, a sentence of doom upon the Noldor for the kinslain. Finarfin returns to the Blessed Realm with some of the Eldar, and obtains pardon as the others continue. Fëanor and his faction cross the sea in the Teleri ships, but instead of sending the ships back to Fingolfin and his followers, Fëanor burns the ship, forsaking his half-brother and the other Noldor. Fingolfin angrily determines to get to Middle-earth, which he does after much suffering and hardship. The power of King Thingol and Melian increases in Middle-earth, and their people, the Sindar, are deemed the most fair, wise, and skilled elves of Middle-earth. During the first age of Melkor's imprisonment, Thingol and Melian have one child, Luthien. During the second age, The dwarves arrive and befriend the Sindar, and when Melian counsels Thingol that the peace will not last, he has the dwarves build a stronghold for the Sindar. In the Third Age, the dwarves create arms for the Sindar after warning that evil creatures wander about the woods. Denethor, the son of Lenwë, fears the evil creatures and leads his people to Thingol's land for safety. Thingol welcomes them as long-lost kin. The peace of Middle-earth ends. Melkor gathers a force of orcs and attacks the Sindar. The Sindar win on the east, but Denethor is killed when they lose on the west. Melian erects a girdle to keep intruders out of her and Thingol's lands. This occurs at the same time that Feanor crosses the sea and burns the ships. Quinta Silmarillion. The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 11. Of the Sun and Moon, A Hiding of Valinor, and Chapter 12. Of Men. The Valar mourn the loss of the two trees of Valinor and the departure of Feanor and the Eldar. They consider redress for Melkor's evils, but do not determine anything yet. The Valar take a bough from Telperion and fruit from Lorelin and set them in the sky, creating the sun and the moon in order to give light to Middle-earth. They worry about the men who will arrive soon. Melkor is angry about the light because he is unable to bear the sun. He tries to attack the moon but fails, causing him to lose some of his power and become more closely bound to eat. The Valar, remembering Melkor's destruction of Almarin, refortify Valinor, leaving only one pass open for the Eldar to use. Men awake, but they fear the Valar. The Elves befriend men, and they live in harmony. The Elves and men ally themselves in battle against Melkor, but many die. Men die much easier than Elves, mainly due to their mortality. Mainly due to their mortality. Men become estranged from Elves and eventually usurp the sunlight. Quinta Silmarillion. The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 13, of the Return of the Noldor, and Chapter 14, of Beleriand, its realms. When Feanor burns the ships, Morgoth sees the flames. The orcs attack the Noldor, but the Noldor are victorious. Feanor follows the orcs' retreat, hoping to be taken to Morgoth. The Balrogs attack Feanor, and his sons save him, but the injuries Feanor sustains lead to his death. He dies, cursing Morgoth 3 times and holding his sons to their oath and revenge against Morgoth. The Grey Elves befriend the Noldor. Morgoth offers to give Maedhros a Silmaril, but instead captures him and hangs him by his wrist from a rock. Fingolfin's people arrive to the settlement of the Noldor. Fingon searches for Maedhros. Manwë's eagle carries Fingon up to the rock where Maedhros hangs, and Fingon cuts Maedhros' hand off in order to free him. Fingolfin rules as the king of the Noldor. King Thingol refuses to permit the Noldor to live in his lands. The people of Caranthir allied themselves with the dwarves. 20 years later, there is a great feast during which the elves swear friendship. 30 years later, Turgon and Finrod journey south and almost sends them foreboding dreams, causing Finrod to build Nargothrond and Turgon to build Gondolin. Morgoth's orcs attack the Noldor, but Fingolfin and Maedhros defeat the orcs. The elves band closer as Morgoth captures as many Eldar as possible, and Morgoth learns of the dissension amongst the elves. The orcs attack Fingolfin but are defeated, and Morgoth realizes that the unaided orcs are no match for the Noldor. One of Morgoth's young dragons, Glaurung, challenges and is beaten by Fingon, angering Morgoth because Glaurung showed himself too soon. The elves build settlements and form alliances, but hear little news from the east of Beleriand. Quinta Silmarillion. The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 15. of the Noldor in Beleriand, and Chapter 16 of Maeglin. Turgon secretly builds Gondolin in the Hidden Vale, but Ulmo warns him of the doom of Mandos. Galadriel tells Melian about the Silmarils and Fëanor's vengeance and warns Thingol against trusting the sons of Fëanor too much. Due to Morgoth's rumors, King Thingol chides Finrod for the kinslaying of the Tel'arai, and Thingol banishes them temporarily. Turgon's sister Ardhel grows bored of Gondolin and wants to leave. Turgon agrees that she may go to Fingon and Hithlum, but when she departs, she decides to seek the sons of Fëanor. Thingol will not allow her to pass through the girdle, and Ardhel gets separated from her escorts, who return to Gondolin. Ardhel gets lost and encounters Eol, who falls in love. Eol and Ardhel marry and have a son, Maeglin. Ardhel tells Maeglin stories about Turgon and Gondolin. Eol forbids Maeglin to go to Gondolin or to meet the sons of Fëanor since Eol hates the Noldor. When Eol attends a feast hosted by the Dwarves, Maeglin and Ardhel depart from their home and head toward Gondolin. Eol returns early and angrily pursues them. Ardhel and Maeglin reach Gondolin, and Turgon is very pleased with his sister's son. Eol arrives and is brought before Turgon for judgment. Turgon treats Eol with much honor, but Eol hates the Noldor more than ever and demands that Maeglin return home with him. Turgon gives Eol and Maeglin the choice of living or dying at Gondolin, Eol throws a javelin at Maeglin, but Ardhel blocks it and eventually dies from the blow. Turgon has Eol cast from a precipice. Maeglin prospers in Gondolin, but although he loves Turgon's daughter, Idril, he is not permitted to marry such a near relation. Quinta Silmarillion, The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 17, of the Coming of Men into the West, and Chapter 18, of the Ruin of Beleriand and the Fall of Fingolfin. At men's first appearance, Melkor corrupts them with darkness, and men move west to avoid the dark. Felagund accidentally encounters men and abides with them, playing music and teaching them wisdom, in return for which they are loyal to him. Eventually, Felagund returns home to his people, and Beor joins him. King Thingol refuses to allow men to enter Dariath. Some men have dissensions with the elves and return east. Morgoth plots against men, ordering the orcs to attack Halad and his men. Halad and his son die, but his daughter, Haleth, takes the remainder of the people to Brethil, where she lives until her death. Eventually, Beor dies, causing the elder to wonder at men's short lifespans. Fingolfin is the only elf who wants to attack Morgoth during the time of peace, so the idea is forgotten until Morgoth attacks. Glaurung commands Morgoth's troops. The elves and their allies are sundered. Fingolfin challenges Morgoth, and Morgoth kills Fingolfin. Morgoth attacks Barahir, killing the men and causing the women to flee. Meanwhile, Sauron captures the Western Pass. Morgoth tries to turn men against the Noldor, but the swarthy men ally themselves with Maedhros. The Sindar help Maedhros defeat the orcs. Two men, Hurin and Huor, travel to Gondolin, where Turgon receives them kindly due to Ulmo's advice. Hurin and Huor want to leave, and Turgon allows them to depart once they swear never to reveal the secret of Gondolin. Hurin and Huor keep the secret of Gondolin, but Galdor guesses at the truth, and the news reaches Morgoth. Turgon sends messengers to Valinor to ask the Valator for help in vain. Morgoth sends spies to learn about Turgon and Gondolin. Fingon and the Eldar defeat the orcs, and Hurin serves Fingon. Quinta Silmarillion, The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 19, of Beren and Luthien, and Chapter 20, of the Fifth Battle, Nirnaeth Arnoediad. Morgoth commands Sauron to find and destroy Barahir and his outlaws. Gorlam, one of Barahir's companions, searches for Eilunel, his lost wife, and this becomes known to Morgoth, who tricks Gorlam into believing Eilunel is still alive. Gorlam reveals Barahir's hiding place before killing the traitor. The orcs attack and slay Barahir and all his men except one, Barahir's son, Beren, who is on an errand at the time. Beren has a foreboding dream and attempts to warn his father too late. He returns home, buries his father's bones, and swears vengeance. Beren kills the captain of the orcs who boasts of killing Barahir. For 4 years, Beren wanders about Dorthwinion alone until an army of orcs chase him, and he decides to search for the hidden kingdom. He is enchanted by Luthien, the daughter of Thingol, and Melian. She also falls in love with him. But Thingol becomes very angry when he discovers their love. Thingol says Beren can marry Luthien if he retrieves a Silmaril. Beren tells King Felagund about his quest. King Felagund joins Beren, and they search for Morgoth in disguise. Sauron captures them and strips them of their disguises, but he cannot discover their names or purposes. Sauron casts them into a pit where Felagund does his best to protect Beren. Meanwhile, Luthien escapes from her father in order to help Beren and Huan and Curufin, who are on a hunt, find Luthien. Curufin decides to capture her and force Thingol to give her to Celegorm in marriage. But Huan helps her escape to search for Beren. When Luthien sings, Beren hears her and responds. Sauron also hears and, planning to capture Luthien, sends wolves after her, but Huan slays the wolves. Sauron goes to capture Luthien himself, but she enchants him and threatens to strip him of his flesh unless he yields mastery of the tower to Luthien. Luthien frees Beren. On their journey, Luthien and Beren are assaulted by Curufin and Celegorm, but Huan helps Luthien and Beren escape. Beren commits Luthien to Huan's care and leaves to fulfill his oath to retrieve a Silmaril. Beren grieves when Luthien follows him because he does not want her in Morgoth's shadows. Luthien sings and puts the guard of Morgoth's fortress, Carcharoth, to sleep. Luthien and Beren enter the fortress, and Morgoth lusts after Luthien. She sings, putting him to sleep also. Beren retrieves a Silmaril, but when he tries to take the others, Morgoth moves in his sleep, and Beren and Luthien flee. Unfortunately, Carcharoth is awake and bites off Beren's hand with the Silmaril still in it. Luthien sucks the venom from Beren's wound, but the hosts of Morgoth awake as Carcharoth screams in agony due to the light of the Silmaril. 3 birds appear and take Luthien and Beren to a dell where Beren is healed before returning Luthien a King Thingol who has been searching for her. Thingol allows Beren to marry his daughter. When Carcharoth wanders about the lands, causing problems, Beren, Thingol, and Huan search for Carcharoth. Huan kills Carcharoth, and the Silmaril is retrieved, but Huan and Beren are slain in the battle. Luthien's spirit leaves her body, and she begs Mandos to be with Beren. Mandos gives her the choice of going to Valinor or forsaking immortality and returning to Middle-earth as a mortal with Beren. Mortal Luthien and Beren return to Middle-earth. Luthien and Beren depart to Tol Galen, where they have a child, J.R.R. the Beautiful. Because of Beren's assault against Morgoth, Madedruz knows that Morgoth is not unassailable, so he gathers armies. Celegorm and Curufin vow to slay Thingol and his people if they do not relinquish the Silmaril, but Thingol refuses. Madedros and his troops free Dorthonion from the orcs for a while, and Madedros challenges Morgoth, who accepts the challenge. Turgon sends an army of 10,000 from Gondolin. The captain of the orcs in the west tries to draw Fingon out, but his challenge goes unanswered, The orcs slay Gelmir in sight of his brother, Gwyndor, who rides out in a rage with the rest of the army joining him, including Fingon. They slay the guards at the doors of Angband, but they are trapped there, and all are slain except Gwyndor, who is taken alive. The Eldar are winning until Morgoth looses all the remaining host of Angband, who separate the armies of Maedhros and Fingon. Ofang leads a host of men to turn on the sons of Feanor, killing none, but injuring all. Nagrim and his brood withstand fire best. Azagal drives a knife into Glaurung's belly, causing the brood of Angband to flee before Glaurung kills Azagal. The dwarves bear Azagal away and cease battling. Fingon is killed, and Hurin and Huor convince Turgon to flee while he is alive, since he is the last remaining hope of the elves. Huor is killed, but Hurin is taken alive at Morgoth's command. Morgoth's triumph is great. The elves are estranged from men. The realm of Fingon no longer exists. The sons of Feanor wander about, and the orcs and wolves roam freely. Turgon has 7 ships made by Círdan and sends messengers to the Valar, but only one messenger survives, Varnwait. Morgoth tortures Hurin in vain to betray Turgon. Quinta Silmarillion. The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 21, of Turin Turambar, and Chapter 22, of the Ruin of Doriath. Morwen, Hurin's wife, sends their son Turin to Thingol, who raises him as a foster son. Morwen refuses to leave the house in which she dwelt with Hurin, so Thingol sends messengers to check on her and her daughter, Nienor. One day, the messengers do not return, so Turin departs to search for his mother and battles in the wilderness for 3 years. When he returns to Thingol's lands, Saeros, who is jealous of Thingol's love for Turin, mocks Turin, and Turin kills him and flees. Thingol pardons Turin and sends Beleg to find him. Turin becomes the captain of a band of outlaws and forswears war against all except Angband, but refuses Thingol's pardon. Turin and his outlaws seize the dwarf, Mim, who ransoms his life by offering to guide them through the hills. Morgoth's orcs capture Mime and his son, and Mim ransoms their lives by promising to lead the orcs through the hills under the condition that Turin must not be slain. The orcs capture Turin, and Beleg swears vengeance on Mime. Beleg encounters Gwyndor, who has just escaped from Angband. They rescue Turin, but Turin thinks Beleg is an orc and kills him. Turin learns from Gwyndor that Hurin still defies Morgoth. Gwyndor and Turin go to Gwyndor's land, Nargothrond, where Turin is called Turambar. Morwen and Nienor finally flee to Thingol. Turin goes to war against the orcs where Gwyndor is killed in battle. Turin returns to Nargothrond to save the king's daughter, Finduilas, but Glaurung mocks Turin as the orcs kidnap Finduilas. Turin learns that Morwen went to Thingol and learns of Finduilas' death. Meanwhile, evil tidings of Turin's death reaches Morwen, who leaves Thingol's lands to search for Turin, followed by Nienor. Glaurung kills their escorts and bespells Nienor with forgetfulness. Moblung searches for Nienor and Morwen. As Nienor sleeps, Turambar finds her. Brethil and Turambar both love Nienor, but she loves Turambar. Brethil tries to restrain her, knowing Turambar's true identity, but they marry, and she conceives. When Glaurung attacks, Turambar goes to war, and Nienor follows him against Brandir's advice. Brandir follows for love of Nienor. Turambar kills Glaurung, but Glaurung's gaze knocks him unconscious. When she hears Glaurung's screams, Nienor retreats into forgetfulness. But Brandir finds her and leads her away. Nienor regains her away. Nienor regains her mind and insists on seeking Turin. Glaurung opens her eyes, revealing Turin's identity as her brother. Nienor throws herself off the cliff. Brandir returns to their people with news of Turin and Nianor's deaths. Turin wakes after Glaurung dies and returns to the people. When Brandir tells him about Nianor's identity and death, Turin kills Brandir. When Mablung confirms Brandir's story, Turin kills himself. Distraught, Morwen wanders in the wild. Morgoth releases Hurin from bondage, pretending pity, but attempting to further hatred between elves and men. Hurin walks into Hithlum, but is shunned as one who is in league with Morgoth. Morgoth's servants watch Hurin, as do Manwë's eagles. Turgon hears news of Hurin and sends eagles to search for Hurin, whose cries for Turgon allow Morgoth to learn the area in which Gondolin is located. Hurin searches for Morwen after dreaming of her and finds her at a stone, but she dies that night. Hurin wanders on until he stands before the broken doors of Felagund, where Mim approaches him, and Hurin kills Mim. Hurin travels to Thingol and chides him for failing his family. Melian tells Hurin that Morgoth has bewitched him because they never intended ill to befall his family. And Hurin's eyes are opened, and undeceived, he apologizes and casts himself into the sea. Thingol has the dwarves put the Silmaril in Naglamir, a dwarf, made necklace. But the dwarves withhold it from Thingol, saying he has no right to the craft of their forefathers. When Thingol banishes the dwarves, they kill him and flee. Melian mourns Thingol, speaks to no one, and disappears to Valinor. The dwarves defeat the elves and take the Naglamir with the Silmaril in it. Beren and Dior ambush the dwarves after hearing of their treachery. Beren kills the king of the dwarves and gives the Naglamir to Luthien, who wears it. Dire Thingol dwells with the Sindar and learns of his parents' death when a messenger brings the Naglamir to him. The sons of Feanor learn that Dior wears a Silmaril and send claim to it, which Dior ignores. The sons of Feanor attack and kill Dior in the second kin, slaying, but Dior's daughter, Elwing, escapes with a small remnant of people and the Silmarot. Quinta Silmarillion. The History of the Silmarils, Chapter 23. Of Tuor and the Fall of Gondolin, and Chapter 24. Of the Voyage of Arundel and the War of Aerth. Tuor, Huor's son, is raised by Anael of the Grey Elves, and Ulmo places the desire to depart from the land of his fathers in Tuor's heart. Tuor goes to Nevrast, where he arrays himself in Turgon's arms and swords, which were left in the deserted Vinyamar. Ulmo appears to Tuor and bids him seek Gondolin. On his way, Tuor meets Veranwi, who guides him to Turgon. Tuor warns Turgon to depart to the sea, but Maeglin speaks against Tuor, causing Turgon to ignore Tuor's counsel. Tuor wins Idril's heart and marries her, infuriating Maeglin. Tuor, an Idril child, is Irindil Hafelven. Idril builds a secret passage out of the city. Maeglin is captured by the orcs and reveals the exact location of Gondolin to Morgoth in exchange for rule of Gondolin and possession of Idril. Morgoth sends Maeglin back to Gondolin to avoid suspicion and to help from within. Morgoth attacks Gondolin, and Gondolin falls. Tuor kills Maeglin, and with Idril, he leads the people along the secret passage to dwell beside the Syrian. Morgoth believes his triumph is fulfilled and no longer fears the sons of Feanor. Ulmo begs the Valar to help the Eldar, but Manwë refuses. When Tuor grows old, he sails away with Idril, the only man to join the Elder in Valinor. Arundel, the lord of the people at Sirion, marries Elwing, and they have two sons, Elrond and Elros. Arundel has two purposes: to seek Tuor and Idril, and to bring the message of the elves and men to the Valar. Certain helps Arundel build a ship, Vingilat. Meanwhile, the sons of Feanor hear of the dwelling at Sirion and attack and kill the people at Sirion. Elwing jumps into the sea, wearing the Silmaril, but Olmo bears her up and makes her a bird, which flies to Eärendil's boat. Maglor and Maedhros are the only sons of Feanor to survive the battle, and Maglor raises Elrose and Elrond. Eärendil and Elwing seek the Valar and finally find distant shores. Eärendil arrives in Valinor and asks pardon, pity, and mercy for elves and men, and the Valar grant his prayer. Meanwhile, Elwing is befriended by the Teleri. Manwë decrees that Eärendil, Elwing, Elrond, and Elrond and Elros will be allowed to choose to which kindred to be joined. Eärendil and Elwing choose to be joined to the elves for Lúthien's sake. The Valar turn Vingilad into a beautiful vessel, with the Silmaril shining in the helm, which Eärendil sails beyond the world, while Elwing is taught flight and the language of the birds. The people of Middle-earth see Vingilad and believe it is a new star, but Maedhros recognizes the Silmaril. The Valar prepare for battle and sail to the east, where they, with the Eldar, destroy Morgoth and his minions, ending Angband's power. Beonwe takes and guards the two remaining Silmarils. The elves are bid to return to Valinor. Maglor and Maedhros demand the Silmarils because of their oath, but Eonwe refuses them because their crimes make them incapable of possessing the gem. The sons of Feanor steal the Silmaril, each possessing one, but they are unable to bear the pain of the light. Maedhros jumps into a pit and is buried in the earth, while Maglor jumps into the sea. Most of the elves return to Valinor. Morgoth is thrust into the timeless void and guarded by Eärendil. Akalabeth. The downfall of Númenor. Most men are subject to Morgoth. The men who fight for the Valar in the great battle are referred to as the Edain or Dunedain. After the great battle, men return to the east and are plagued by Morgoth's creatures. Manwë locks Morgoth beyond Ea in the timeless void, but Morgoth's will guides his servants. The Valar decide to summon the Eldar to Valinor and the Eden to a land between Valinor and Middle-earth, Númenor. Elrond follows his elven kin, while Elros chooses to be a king of men and is given an abnormally long life. The Dunedain dwell on Númenor, protected by the Valar and befriended by the Eldar. Men are forbidden to sail westward out of sight of Númenor to avoid becoming envious of immortals. The Dunedain sail east to teach the other men many things. The Dunedain begin to complain about their mortality, and Manwë sends messengers to explain to men that Iluvatar ordained death for men. Atanamir is displeased and dies late, holding on to life until he is witless. The kingdom splits. Half is estranged from the Valar and Eldar, while the other half are elf friends. The Dunedain still fear the Valar, but they do not love them nor sacrifice to Iluvatar. They begin settling in Middle-earth and dealing with the other men. Sauron hates and fears the Númenóreans. Adunacor, the 20th king, forbids elven tongues. Then Gimilzor, the 23rd king, punishes men who welcome the elves to Númenor. The Valar withdraw their protection from Númenor. Gimilzor marries Inzilbeth, an elf friend, and they have Inziladin and Gimilcad. Inziladun is faithful to the Valar and Eldar, and he tries to restore some of their customs. His brother opposes him with a faction of men, and Gimilcad's son, Ar-Pharazôn, takes over the opposition once his father dies. Inziladin dies with only one daughter. Miriel, who Ar-Pharazôn marries against her, will in order to rule Númenor. Ar-Pharazôn sails east and summons Sauron, who agrees to go to Númenor, where he spreads corruption. Sauron convinces Ar-Pharazôn to dismiss the council of Amandil, an elf friend, and to cut down the White Tree. Before the White Tree is destroyed, Amandil plants the fruit of the White Tree in a hidden place to preserve it. The king's men worship Melkor, while the faithful are deemed traitors. Under Sauron's counsel, Ar-Pharazôn decides to wage war against the Valar. Amandil sails west to beg aid of the Valar, but he disappears from knowledge. Under Amandil's counsel, Elendil, his son, prepares his ships to flee from Numenor. The Valar attack by sending lightning which kills many men. Ar-Pharazôn mains his fleet and sails west to wage war against the Valar. When he lands on Aman, the waters engulf the fleets, while the warriors who set foot on Aman are buried under the falling hills. Aman is lost from men forever, and Numenor is ruined. Elendil, his sons, and the other faithful flee to Middle-earth. Sauron also returns to Middle-earth, but he is stripped of the disguise which makes him appear fair to men. Many believe Akalabeth is lost forever, but some search for it, and rumors arise of men who have seen the island, of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. Sauron repents of his evil deeds to Eonwy, but is too proud to serve the Valar. He returns to Middle-earth and his evil ways. Middle-earth is destroyed and reformed during the Great Battle, and some of the Elves stay in Middle-earth and befriend the Dwarves. The Elves make many rings, and Sauron creates one ring to rule all of the others, giving it much of his strength and will. The Elves feel Sauron's control over them when he puts his ring on, so they take theirs off. He demands the rings, but the Elves manage to hide 3 of them, the ones which Sauron wants the most. There is constant war between the Elves and Sauron. Sauron gives 9 rings to men and 7 to dwarves, using the rings to men, and 7 to dwarves, using the rings to control them and work evil. Sauron gathers Morgoth's minions, and elves begin to call him the Dark Lord. All men except the Númenóreans are under Sauron's dominion. After Akalabeth, Sauron returns to Middle-earth to find that the power of Gil-galad has grown great, and Sauron prepares for war against the Eldar and the men of Westernesse. Meanwhile, the Númenórean survivors settle in Middle-earth and are befriended by Gil-galad. The survivors bring heirlooms from Númenor, the Palantari, and the White Tree. Elendil and Gil-galad form the last alliance which lays siege to Sauron's fortress for 7 years, ending when Sauron fights and kills Elendil and Gil-galad. Sauron is banished from his body for a long time. And Narsil-Isildur cuts the ring from Sauron's hand and takes it for it. There is still hope as the Third Age begins. The White Tree flowers, and Sauron's minions disperse. Many men turn from evil, but more remember Sauron and hate the Númenóreans. After Elendil's death, men and elves become estranged. Isildur refuses to destroy Sauron's ring, but when he goes to the south, orcs overwhelm and kill his men. The ring makes Isildur invisible, but slips from his finger in the river, and the orcs kill him. Chaos is foretold until the ring is rediscovered, and Sauron returns to Middle-earth. The 9 ring wraiths return to prepare the way for Sauron, whose power is growing again. Elrond preserves the memory of all that was fair, but no one speaks of the 3 hidden rings. Darkness creeps into the forest, Greenwood the Great, and it becomes known as Mirkwood. This signals Sauron's returns. The Istari wizards arrive. Saruman, the chief of the Istari, studies the Rings of Power. Mirthrandir learns that the sorcerer Dol Guldur is Sauron in disguise. The Istari decide that the ring is lost and will not be found, so they do nothing, not suspecting that Saruman has turned to dark thoughts and covets the ring. Darkness gathers, and the malice is directed toward the elves and the survivors of Númenor. The Istari drive Sauron from his hold too late. Sauron returns. Saruman withdraws from the Astari as Mithrandir learns of the ring and sends guards to find and protect it. Sauron goes to war with the Astari, elves and men, ending the Third Age. Eventually, Frodo takes the ring to Mount Doom and destroys it, causing the power of the three rings to fade. The Noldor leave Middle-earth forever to men.